All right, now that we've worked with identifying functions and figuring out domain and range, we're going to look at equations that can also be represented with functions. So the title for today's notes will be Equations as Functions. And make sure to put today's date in the top corner of your notes. So functions can also be represented by equations or rules. So the equations are just giving you rules to follow within math. And then when you have a function represented by an equation, the equation will generate ordered pairs. Remember that means x comma y. By taking an input, which is your x value, I'm going to underline that because it's a key word, that results in an output. The y value. So with equations, you're going to have a rule where you take your x value, plug it in, and it results in a y value. And then that's going to give you an ordered pair that you can use to graph when we can connect it back to our graphing. So let's look at some examples. Let's say I gave you the equation y equals x plus 5, and I wanted you to fill out this table of values. So let's say our x values are -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. When you have an equation, you're going to take your x values and you're going to replace the x in the equation with the number that you're using as your input and seeing what comes out. So for example, for the first one, I'm going to plug in -2 for x, and I'm just going to add 5 to it. I'm going to do what the rule is saying to do. So -2 plus 5 gives me 3. Do the same thing with the next x value. You take the value and you plug it in, and you apply the rule. Do the same thing again. This time I'm plugging in 0, then 1, and then 2. So I'm taking my x value, and I'm plugging it in, and it's applying the rule. So notice the only thing that changed was what I plugged in for x each time. And now what we have is from this equation, we use it to complete the table, and now we have a list of ordered pairs that I can also put on the side here as x comma y. So my input -2 gave me an output of 3. So that's a point I can plot on the graph. My input -1 gave me an output of 4. 0 gave me an output of 5. 1 an output of 6. 2 an output of 7. So when you're given an equation, you should be able to fill out a table of values based on that equation. Let's look at a little bit harder of a rule. All right, so let's say our rule this time is 2x plus 4. So we'll make our same table, and we'll leave some space to do the work. And we'll pick -2, -1, 0, and 1. So I'm going to take this x value and I'm going to plug it in for x. Now what's different about this time is that there's a number in front of 2, or in front of the x. Remember, you have to multiply that number by the x value. So when you plug it in, you do 2 times -2 plus 4. And so now you'd have to calculate that. 2 times -2 is -4. -4 plus 4 is 0. 2 times -1 plus 4. So 2 times -1 is -2, plus 4 is +2. 2 times 0 plus 4. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 4 is 4. And then 2 times 1 plus 4. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 4 is 6. So we took our x values, our inputs, we plugged them in for x, and now we're getting an output. And then I can list those as coordinates. I've got -2 with 0, -1 with 2, 0 with 4, and 1 with 6. So these x values are giving me outputs of y values, and I can put those together to create a graph. Let's look at 2 more examples, and then you should be ready to go on your own with the practice problems in class. All right, so number 3. Let's say this time I gave you one with a fraction. So y equals 1/2 x minus 4. So we'll make our same table. X, y. All right, because we're dealing with this half, I'm going to use even numbers because it's easier to take half of an even number where you won't get a decimal as an answer. So we're going to use -4, -2, 0, 2, and 4. So I'm taking my x value and I'm plugging it into the equation to find my y value. So when I plug in -4, you're doing the same step as we did before where you're multiplying. You're just taking half of -4 and multiplying it, or you're taking half and multiplying it by -4. So if we do that on our calculator, to type in a half, you do 1 divided by 2, and then parentheses -4. That's taking half of -4. So half of -4 is -2, and then we have to apply the rest of the rule. We have to subtract 4. So that gives me -6 as my output. Half of -2 minus 4. Well, half of -2 is -1. -1 minus 4 is -5. Half of 0. Well, anything times 0 is always 0. And then 0 minus 4 is -4. Half of 2. Half of 2 is 1. Minus 4 is -3. And then half of 4 minus 4. So half of 4 is 2. Minus 4 is -2. So here's my equation, and I'm just taking my x value, plugging it in, and then seeing what comes out for my y value. So again, the only thing that changed was the x value that I plugged in. And then what this gives us is it gives us some coordinates, x comma y, your inputs and your outputs for the table. So the last example to look at, we're just going to rewrite the equation in a different way. But we'll follow the same steps. We just have to make sure we're applying the right order of operations. So let's say I gave you an equation that looks like this. 5 minus x. So I'm going to list my x values to get my y values. Then we're going to look at some negative numbers here. So I'm going to start with -3, then -2, -1, 0, and 1, just to get a sense of how this one's going to look. So you have to be careful with this one because there's a minus sign here. So I have to plug in -3 in for x. So it's going to be 5 minus -3. So notice there are two minus signs there. That's a common mistake people make because they see the minus sign and think they don't have to write this one. We're plugging in -3, so we want to see what comes out when we plug -3. So 5 minus -3 is +8. 5 minus -2, when you have to add these because 2 negatives makes a positive, this becomes 7. 5 minus -1, so this becomes 5 plus 1, which is 6. 5 minus 0, just 5. And then 5 minus 1 just gives us 4. So I'm just taking my inputs, my x values, and plugging them in to see what y values I get. And then I can list those as coordinates. So I've got -3, 8, -2, 7, -1, 6, 0, 5, and 1, 4. So this is looking at using an equation to fill out a table and connecting your inputs with your outputs. So now you should be ready to move on to the practice problems in class tomorrow.